Let Mary and Violet be torn, a history of mystery. Let Mary and Violet be torn upon wheels, for her sake let all chaste women be utterly despised among you. Liber Alvel Legis 3:55. Babylon is a goddess risen from the rich biblical vision of Revelations. A goddess who apparently appeared from nowhere, with a seven-headed beast in attendance, giving Christian kids compelling sexy nightmares about the impending war in heaven. She is a holy whore wrapped in scarlet and gold, ready to deliver her Antichrist son, the ultimate battlefield weapon, on the side of the fallen angels. She is the archetypical bad girl, sexy as hell with her blood-red lips and raking fingernails. Totally in control, her thighs are wrapped around one muscular-looking beast. Black magic bad boy Aleister Crowley claimed her in a collision of Victorian sexual repression and his perpetual chemical erection. A succession of Scarlet Women willingly played whore to his beast 666. In the swirl of the 60s she became an occult archetype of instant titty, a swinger's fantasy of fuck. The drone of the Stones and the films of Kenneth Anger lit her up like a torch. In the 80s AIDS blackened her face. Now she is an occasional accessory to adolescent rebel angels dosed on hormones and right royally fucked off with the New World Order. Only it is not that soundbite simple. Babylon has a history far deeper and richer than this, a grail brim filled with blood that has been passed down through history in an untold story of passion, sacrifice and illumination. The holy whore has been trampled and abused. As well as I can, this is the tale I am going to tell. Babylon is the meeting point of ceremonial magic and the witch cult. She is a power that comes out of the past and resonates into the now with the compelling song of the witch woman. She is both the primal form of the goddess from the far distant past and the most modern icon of post-human style. The holy whore is the great goddess debased through the centuries and now returned at the head of her armies whose ragged pennants rise across the battle-scarred world as we go forth into the new eon. If you are looking for a pin-up girl for these days of blood and thunder, Babylon is where you have got to look. To tell the story of Babylon we will go back into the days of Samaria and listen to the words of Inanna and Ishtar, only to see her reflected later through the prejudices and hatred of the captive Jews. We must penetrate the adytum and hear the priestess' oracular words coming through in fragments like Burroughs' smack and static prose. We are watchers of the dance of veils as Salome, Mary Magdalene, Isis and Astarte display the shrine of the mystery to our hungry eyes. She is a pole dancer, a dollar whore, a catwalk advert for impossibly red lipstick, a beautiful young girl. Your first love. She is the Sophia of the Gnostics, a black Madonna, a heroine of the heretic heart. We see her in Elizabeth the Virgin Queen and the unwanted and terrible visions of Edward Kelly. William Blake is seduced by her beauty. A procession of brave antichrists strive to be worthy of her love. Byron drags club-footed after her. We see Crowley desperately searching for her with fallen women and strange drugs. His heavy-ringed fingers reaching for her, imploring her through the darkness. The brilliant Jack Parsons, whose solid rocket fuel put men on the moon, burns to death trying to make her rise, terrible in her beauty. This is about her and for her alone. I am a hand on heart, stick a needle in my eye, ritual magician. I make no pretension to classical scholarship, anthropology or archaeology. Erratic capitalization and poetic connections abound, for better or for worse. What I have done is pursue Babylon to the full extent of my powers. I have carpet burns and scars, broken friendships and lost lovers. I have calluses on my knees from meditation. I have screamed myself silent and stayed up to watch the sunrise so many times. I have made love. This is where my understanding comes from. If St. Paul saw through a glass darkly, my fault is that I have gazed directly at the sun. Perhaps my strange journey will help you on your own crooked path towards her. Like it or not, that is where you're going. The holy whore is coming for you. Are you experienced? To understand what I am going to say you do not need a degree in Aleister Crowley or a master's in metaphysics. I want you young, raw, hungry and passionate. This book should make sense to those who pick this up as their first book as much as those who have a library stuffed with the spines of heavyweight occulture, and hopefully a hell of a lot more. This is the simplest thing. This is for virgins, for those of you who can feel wonder and excitement and love, regardless of how far you have wandered down the paths of carnal pleasure. This still will not be an easy read. Just keep sight of the very simple central point and it will see you through. If you are new to all this, some of the terms will be alien, and the ideas hard, but the central thrust is all that you require. I want you to be thrilled with her presence. All the time she is trying to tell you something very simple, instinctive. Let the blood in your veins respond to her, that is where the magic is. In the end the words will not count. Revelations? The eternal feminine leads us onward. Goethe, Faust Part 2. Any description of Babylon must begin with the Book of Revelations. Where the sheer terror of change comes in woman form to St. John the Divine adrift on Patmos sat amongst the scarlet-cloaked fly agaric and bound in a rosary of repression. His personal history is less than edifying, with what sounds like an arson attack on a temple of Artemis, the drowning of a local magician and sundry other atrocities. But Revelations is the real poison chalice. This is the core text. It makes for an inspired, bitter, and prophetic 22-chapter roller coaster ride through war in heaven and earth. At times it's a polemic against the pagan gods of the day, already well on the way to being cast as demons in the new Christian history. At others it's a prophecy about the fate of the world. It's a classic puzzle box mystic text, and I don't claim to be presenting a definitive version or an only truth. This is my cut, and it's as valid and false as any other. It is time that we squared up to this text that has been pilfered by horror movies and strangely neglected by magicians, pagans, and Satanists. Our history is hidden here. Every time a new disaster befalls the world, Revelations is trawled out and read through for hints and signs that these are the end times. However pernicious we may find it to be, it cannot be ignored. Revelations gains new significance with every crisis, and as our mismanagement of the environment reaps the whirlwind, it is to biblical prophecy that the Western world will turn. However postmodern and clever commentators think they are being, it is the words of St. John the Divine that will be trumpeted out. We need to read this book again. We need to make it ours, or it will be used by those who trespass against us. This is also a book that has divided Christians. In the 4th century, John of Chrysostom argued that it should not be included in the canon of the New Testament. It was too dangerous, too open to abuse and misinterpretation. It is the only book that the Eastern Orthodox Church does not read in the Divine Liturgy. Revelations continues to perplex and alarm, seized upon by evangelical eagles hungering for the end times, the rapture, and the whiff of brimstone to inflame their congregations. It is shunned by the moderates building interfaith bridges with their liberal lamb Jesus. Revelations insists you take sides in the coming war. It is not a comfortable bedtime read. If you care to watch the skies for signs, this is the timeline Revelations and the biblical apocalyptic canon proposes, with tick boxes so you can play along. Asterisk, a threat from the kings of the East. Asterisk, the Pope makes a special decree and is driven from Rome before dying a terrible death. Asterisk, a new Pope is elected outside of Rome. He crowns a Christian king who defends the West from the kings of the East. Asterisk, 3 days of darkness and the great chastisement come with a comet. Asterisk, the Christian king is victorious over the East, and we enter a period of peace. Asterisk, the Antichrist rises to power out of Babylon. Asterisk, the Antichrist rules for 3.5 years. Asterisk, the 2 witnesses preach against him and he kills them. Asterisk, these witnesses rise from the dead on the 3rd day, and are taken into heaven. Asterisk, 40 days later, the Antichrist tries to rise up to heaven by magic and is struck down. Asterisk, Christ returns to the earth. Asterisk, the dead Christians rise from the grave and are taken into a new heaven and a new earth. Asterisk, the Christians that are alive are taken up to a new heaven and a new earth. Asterisk, Christ destroys the old heaven and earth. Anyone with a half-decent imagination can begin to fill in the names, times and signs. Perhaps you would care to add a sprinkling of UFOs, nuclear war and Islamic terror? Just tune in to the Saturation 24-hour global news media for further inspiration. Very quickly you can feel part of a death cult with a doom watch steadily ticking down. It doesn't give me a warm fuzzy feeling that those who subscribe to these literal beliefs rule a significant amount of the planet. There's just one small problem. Revelations explicitly states that the end times were happening right then in the ancient Roman Empire. On the very first page, in the 3rd paragraph, John writes that the time is at hand. This is not a document about barcodes, the United Nations, or credit cards. It comes out of a very real sense that the end is, or rather was, nigh in the 1st century. Jesus was meant to be pitching up any minute. That sure as hell didn't happen. Unfortunately for us, this little detail has been rather overlooked by Christianity, which was not prepared to fold its franchise when the Messiah did not show on time. Soon he will be 2,000 years too late. You can tap dance around the facts all you like, but this is the bottom line. Revelations was a damp squib, it fizzled out in ancient Rome. Meanwhile, mankind still hankers after a spiritual renaissance with the full complement of angels and pits of eternal hellfire. We are a world moving towards very real environmental crisis, and Revelations will be what many turn to in an attempt to make sense of it all. However nonsensical, the grand archetypes will be seized on and the letter of the text conveniently ignored. Roman remains. Before we rush headlong into the future, we need to understand John, and to do that we have to understand the turbulent times he lived in. The terror that was Nero had committed suicide and his death plunged Rome into civil war. Titus and his father succeeded Nero, But the conspiracy theorists of the day whispered that Nero's death had been faked, and that he would return with an army and fall on Rome. A grim thought indeed. Even the most historically illiterate know that Nero was a tyrant. Rome was literally under a black cloud. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD had thrown ash as far as Egypt. The oracles muttered darkly, and further disasters followed swiftly on its heels. In 80 AD a fire swept through Rome, and this was followed by a plague that raged for a year. The Mayfly Emperor Titus died after 2 years, 2 months and 20 days of power, numbers to be conjured with. His brother Domitian took power with none of the caution his sibling had exercised in appeasing the people after the excesses of Nero. John wrote Revelations in 96 AD, in Domitian's reign. The Christian Church was now under pagan persecution from an emperor who demanded to be called God the Lord. This was impossible for the followers of the Jesus cult. Christians would not offer incense and wine to the statue of the Emperor Domitian, and that left them wide open to charges of treason. Those who did not rebuke their faith after 3 chances and offer up incense to the emperor were executed. 3 strikes and you are out was the harsh rule of Roman citizenship. This was a bad time to be a member of the young cult, which now suffered under determined persecution. The atmosphere of terror under Domitian is the strong wine in which the pages of Revelations are steeped. John, as head of the church in Ephesus, was exiled to Patmos with his disciple Prochorus. He was lucky to leave with his life. Patmos is a volcanic arid rock, and John received revelations in a bare grotto. He recited as Prochorus wrote the words by the light of 7 flickering candles which find their way into the text. There is still a cross there in the cell, carved by the hands of John. It is a simple place which enabled his mind to range forth and experience visions that rival the richness of the most complex Tibetan tankas. For John this was the end time, a time of antichrists. In imitation of Paul's 7 letters, he writes 7 letters to the churches in Asia. These are letters that were never sent, they are propaganda for the frontline troops in a time of adversity. His edict was clear, to stand firm and not bow to the emperor. With the death of Domitian, John could return to Ephesus and take a powerful role in the sculpting of the early church. He took these hard-won visions with him. These were events he saw as very much happening around him. Revelations is an unexploded bomb, a toxic relic from a war that never came and a Messiah who never returned, but it is still extremely volatile, dangerous material. Cutting the red wire. From Revelations we hear the goddess described and decried. What was intended as a seal upon the pagan myths has been an unwitting touchstone, transmitting the heretical DNA. Babylon's name is inscribed in the last chapter of the biggest-selling book on the planet. Sex, the central mystery of sin that Christianity has tried to deny, is right at the seductive heart of John's work. I am not going to launch into a lengthy exegesis of the text. That has been done to death by sects and well-meaning schizophrenics and serial killers since it was first written. D.H. Lawrence, that tall tubercular schoolmaster shaking with divine rage, did not believe that Revelations was simply the work of John. In his introduction to Frederick Carter's The Dragon of Revelations he writes, "The apocalypse began probably 2 centuries before Christ, as some small book, perhaps of pagan ritual, or some small pagan Jewish apocalypse written in symbols. It was written over by other Jewish apocalyptists and finally came down to John of Patmos. He turned it more or less rather than more, into a Christian allegory. And later scribes trimmed up his work. So the ultimate intentional, Christian meaning of the book is, in a sense, only plastered over. The great images incorporated are like the magnificent Greek pillars plastered into the Christian church in Sicily. They are not merely allegorical figures, they are symbols. They belong to a bigger age than that of John of Patmos. I would like to lead on from Lawrence and chisel off the plaster and let the pillars of wisdom stand by themselves. This is a time to reclaim our pagan past in order to move forward into the future. Revelations is a mishmash of myths, and can be read as a bad rap for every pagan god, from Dionysus. And the angel thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. 14:19. To Prometheus. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth. 13:13. To the various dying gods that the Jesus myth copied, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image of the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. 13:14. The more you understand the history and myths of the East, the more clearly you can see the horror of monotheism. Every other culture, goddess and god, every other form of worship is thrown onto an untouchable garbage heap of ideas. Mark the devil. Joyful Dionysus is crushed by a vengeful god. We are denied the heroic emancipation of Prometheus, who brought starfire from the heavens. Dumuzi the corn god cannot be allowed to rival Christ. We must bow down and worship the Lamb. The miracles of the undying pagan gods become attributes of the beast, and the power of the goddess becomes the wanton debauch of Babylon. That's bad press. To approach the holy whore is to reclaim our pagan heritage from the distorted lies of Christianity. To some this may sound profoundly satanic, but this is not the inversion of Christianity that leads down a pathway to the Black Mass, the ill use of goats and truly bad music. This is a breaking of the seals on our pagan past and rediscovering our primal power. It's a journey beyond taboo into the dark places of our souls. The profound beauty of Babylon has become terrible. In this sense she is the blackest goddess. When we release the energy of these archetypes it is raw and often frightening. These aspects of ourself, so long neglected, have gone feral, abandoned alone in the dark. To be true to the famous occult maxim know thyself, it is imperative that we explore not only the highest heavens but also the deepest hells. There is a beauty to be wrought here which is unsurpassed. This is something that can be experienced here and now. Eden is right where we are, if we can only learn to see it. If you look at the world through psychoanalytical lenses you will immediately recognize that accepting Babylon and the beast can be a radical method of self-emancipation where your unconscious forces and drives can be unified with the conscious rational mind. If you are a mystic you will understand that this is a war engine that can be used to storm the very gates of heaven. If on the other hand, you are a Christian, you will have sussed by now that I am very much batting for the other team. Our culture is hardwired with a Christian value system. Even if, like myself, you have never been a believer, your mindset will still be shot through with this morality. Our deepest drives are distorted by an internal censor. Whether this is a bearded man sat on a cloud, or a sense of vague guilt will depend on your individual programming. Face up to it. Even if you are enlightened enough to be nodding along with what I'm saying, you still have fetters on your freedom that have not yet been struck. The essence of union with Babylon is letting go and experiencing the unity we once knew. First of all we have to realize that letting go is something we all need to do. Revelations marks a definite historical point, a massive and resounding, thou shalt not. It is a blatant attempt to dam off our access to the unconscious, but all it does is put a kink in the libido hosepipe that is just waiting to explode. There's a lot of pressure building here. Please insert your favorite sex crime, social dysfunction or petty hatred. This is the source of it. William Blake hit it right on the head. You can never be free if you buy into denial. Your initial reaction to seven-headed beasts with horns sticking out of them may not be instantly positive, but it is repression that really makes monsters. The gateway to the unconscious has some very frightening-looking guardians, but that's your first challenge. If you can't get past fear, you aren't going to get very far on this journey. Fear will enslave you. As a piece of panic propaganda, Revelations is great, but for my money the bad guys are the ones who exert the fascination. I'm not big on seven-eyed lambs. The pagan subtext is there, but just reading Revelations to get a clear idea of Babylon is like reading Mein Kampf to get a good idea of what Jews are. John's attacks have the opposite effect of what was intended. They him the enemy, and that is what's interesting. Everything that he hates becomes embodied in this seductive goddess, her red dragon lover and her antichrist son. They are the characters that come alive and step off the page. I'm going to give a brief account of the facets in Revelations that intrigue me. I am looking at the immortal archetypes, not the long-dead history of the ancient world must read into our times. What I do think John received was a genuine vision, but when it strained through the matrix of his mind it became warped. It's a caricature of the truth. The terrible changes he saw can be seen as his own inability to cope with a world that is mutating into a very different future than what he wants. This has been the fate of all visionaries. The divine is made to pass through the narrow mind of one human and bears the stamp of their prejudices and preconceptions as much as the song of the angel. Revelations can be split into 7 segments. Let's do that now so that you can get a sense for the text as it unfolds. I'll use the Catholic titles for the sake of tradition. I Prologue and the Vision of the Son of Man. 234 VV 7. Letters to the 7 churches. The Vision of Heaven and the Adoration of the Lamb. The Providence and Judgments of God in History. The Prelude of Victory and the Binding of Satan. The Glory of the New Jerusalem. The Conclusion and Epilogue. I will break these down, paying special attention to mentions of Babylon and giving you an overview of the text. At 22 chapters the original is far too short for you not to read yourself when you can find the time. I have quoted extensively in case you are unlucky enough not to have a Bible to hand. I Prologue and the Vision of the Son of Man, Revelations I. John starts Revelations with a vision of an angel who wants all the churches to hear what he's got to say. This is not any angel. This is Jesus, so the message is clear to Christians. You better pay attention. He has brass feet, a double-edged sword for a tongue and 7 stars in his hand. It's quite a sight, and it needs to be to reassure the beleaguered faithful. Jesus has not shown up since the ambiguous tomb incident on the third day, contrary to the predictions. They need some cheerleading. 2 letters to the 7 churches, Revelations 2-3. The next 2 chapters are rousing letters to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. They are under threat from internal heresy and external threat from the cult of the emperor. Again, this rather rubbishes the idea that Revelations is meant to be describing future events. For us, the interesting part of the letters comes when John starts by attacking one Jezebel in the diocese of Thyatira. Her name actually means Oath of Baal, often translated as the rather damning follower of idols. This marks her out as part of a very different religious tradition that coexisted with Christianity. The crimes of this Jezebel are an echo of an earlier namesake, though it is possible that by now Jezebel has morphed into a general word for pagan bad girl. The Son of God promises to kill her children and is generally vengeful. In fact, the God of Love delivers a whole bunch of plagues in these scant pages. Her familiar crimes are listed in Revelations 2:20. Notwithstanding I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication, and to eat things sacrificed to idols. Regardless of the truth of the allegations, this passage reinforces certain key biblical ideas about what women cannot do. The attack on Jezebel is fundamentally an attack on her power as a priestess. Women cannot be allowed to exercise this function in the Christian church. The attack on Jezebel also serves as a warning. The priestesses who had watched over the mysteries and transmitted the knowledge of sex magic through their very bodies have it coming to them. The use of the term suffer reminds us of the classic "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" in Exodus 22:18. The simple fact is that the patriarchal slave religion of Pauline Christianity simply cannot abide goddess-based religions, female mysteries and essentially, woman herself. There is no place for her in the new religious order. The ideal woman of the Bible seems to make a remarkable transition from virgin to mother without actually having, let alone enjoying, sex. As Revelations is an attack on Babylon, it is also an attack on all avatars of female spiritosexual power. Jezebel is the first to come under attack, and with her the entire role of priestess and divinity of the goddess. The first Jezebel we encounter in the Bible is in 2 Kings 9. It is important to know her tale to make better sense of the Jezebel in Revelations. Jezebel was the foreign wife of King Ahab of Israel. As a foreigner and worshipper of other gods or Baals, she was a lightning rod for orthodox anger. The prophet Elijah was at the forefront of the hate campaign. With the death of Ahab in battle, his former general Jehu joins with Elijah in a coup to destroy Jezebel and Ahab's lineage. Before assassinating Joram, the son of Ahab, Jehu offers him this bitter retort: "What peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many?" Jehu drives on to Jezreel, where Jezebel is waiting. When she hears of his approach, she apparently does her makeup and looks out of her window. The implication is clear: this is the classic image of a prostitute as well as the goddess Ishtar. As a good servant of God, Jehu has her cast out of the window and her corpse is eaten by dogs. When John, or the angel Jesus, talks of Jezebel in Revelations, this is exactly the kind of compassion that he has in mind. The sacred sexual feminine is anathema. Women are seducers and idolaters. 3. The vision of heaven and the adoration of the Lamb, Revelations 4v. The next 2 chapters describe the throne of God as a mandala. Jesus, now decked out as a 7-eyed lamb monster, is given a book with 7 seals by this god. There is an alternative mandala for Babylon given in Crowley's Waratah Blossoms, which is described for you in detail later in this book as a better roadmap for this journey. 4. The providence and judgments of God in history, Revelations v17. There is little point here in walking you through the procession of horsemen and horrors that rain down upon the world as Jesus breaks open the seals. They simply do not figure in our story. What we are interested in is when Babylon herself appears. In Revelations 12:1 we have the first vision of a woman. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. This is the image used by the Golden Dawn to represent Eden before the fall. This is also the subject of one of Blake's most famous engravings. We have a celestial vision of the great goddess, crowned by the zodiac, throned by the moon, and filled with blazing solar light. A great wonder. A great danger to Jehovah's one-man show. Christian readings identify this woman as the Virgin Mary, but this is a shallow interpretation. These chapters are the most difficult for Christian exegesis because they are a snarl of pagan myth and figures that blend and merge with dream logic. It simply does not make biblical sense. This knotted mystery is what makes Revelation so intriguing, a labyrinth for the scholar, pagan and layman. In these chapters we meet 3 women, one watched by the dragon, one seated upon it. The third a triumphant bride. Perhaps they are just one woman with three faces? There is no definitive reading. What I want to know is, who is Babalon? Where does she come from, and where is she going? I do not have to neatly tie up the loose ends in the way that a Christian reading must strive to do. I am only interested in her. There is a face hidden here that has been excised from our heritage. So let us return to the first woman. Before her stands a seven-headed red dragon ready to devour her child when she gives birth. The dragon is red to show the nature of its power, pure male, hot and horny as hell. Engorged with blood, the red dragon is drawn magnetically to her. As Carl Jung would no doubt tell you, the dragon is a symbol of blind impulse, deep primordial desire. The seven heads represent the seven lower sephirah of the tree of life and the seven planets. The dragon lifts up each of its seven throbbing heads to be with her. In Christian theology, this is a very bad thing. Fucking your way to heaven is right out. In John's reading, the identity of the dragon is plain. That old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. The old pagan gods have since suffered centuries of being skewered by zealous saints in retribution for their upstanding desire to unite with the king's daughter. Later iconography has Babylon replaced with a more sympathetic-looking Rubenesque virgin lashed to a convenient rock or tree and rather touching alfresco bondage scenes. Perhaps now in more enlightened times we can see the serpent as a friend of man rather than something to crush under heel. I would suggest that the woman and the serpent is an ancient religious image, and it is this which John is objecting to. As a Greek, John seems to have mangled the myth of Apollo who slays the python at Delphi, where the virgin priestess/pythoness would get high on fumes and pronounce the oracles. This is the same kind of witchcraft which Jezebel has been condemned for. There are also shades here of the Sumerian myth of the slaughter of Tiamat. The red dragon wanting to eat her child seems a little strange. This is where I conjecture that we are talking about a magical transformation, where the red dragon, having impregnated her, now wants to gain the powers of the child which is half her and half him. The divine androgyne of Neoplatonism. Devil worshippers devour babies is a less sophisticated understanding of this symbolism. In Western sex magic and alchemy, the child is the elixir created by the mingling of her menstrual blood and the dragon's seed. So right here in Revelations we have the grand magical secret written for those who have the eyes to see. If you're not familiar with this spare monastic secret, I'd suggest you read some classic texts on mysticism with your mind comfortably reclined in the boudoir. Better still, conduct your own experiments on this. Suddenly it'll all make sense. Western magic has tiptoed around this secret for far too long. Crowley famously described sex magic in terms of human sacrifice to avoid the censors and made the auto-initiations a series of progressively plainer hints about this central sex magical secret. Many magical groups still pretend that this cat is not out of the bag. It is. Magic is sex is magic. Our star-gilded lady then flies off with eagle wings, and as the keener alchemists among you will know, the gluten of the eagle is standard code for the female sexual secretions. So this woman is obviously aware of the potency and use of the different callus, juices, or potions that flow from her sex. Being able to fly links her to the witchcraft and shamanic tradition. There's then some cryptic jive about her being nourished by the face of a serpent. Reading this as an allusion to another sex magical act is, I trust, not too hard for you to swallow. Then the aforementioned dragon opens his mouth and causes a flood which is swallowed by the earth, not the woman. But wait, if the earth is the great goddess, then the dragon has in fact fertilized the earth. This isn't some premature ejaculation or a spit rather than a swallow. The goddess has just been pumped full of dragon's blood. In one sense that makes us all the children of Revelations. Perhaps we can go full circle back to Greek myth and remember that Gaia, the goddess of the earth, was the mother of Python. None of this sounds like an account of Mary and the birth of Jesus. It is rather a mass of myths. This is a vindication of Lawrence's position that Revelations is built around a pagan core. The dragon is followed by the emergence of the beast from the sea, which is described in Revelations 13:2. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. Just as there are three women, we have three consorts, the dragon, the beast and the Antichrist, whose identities shift and merge. Both the dragon and the beast have 7 heads and 10 horns. It is safe to assume that they are facets of the same force. These characters are not an innovation of John. The apocalyptic dream sequences in Daniel contain the blueprint for both the dragon and the beast from the sea. Compare the verse above from Revelations with Daniel 7:3-7 below. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man. The man's heart was given to it. And behold another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. These first 3 beasts are amalgamated in Revelations into the one beast from the sea. The 4th beast of Daniel 7:7 sounds very much like a dragon. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth, it devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it were diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. The war against heaven follows, and despite a victory for his side, Daniel is all shook up. It should be clear by now that Revelations is part of an apocalyptic Christian tradition and not the standalone text it is often seen as. I leave it up to you to decide whether both prophets are describing the same war. The narrative now moves to the fall of the city of Babylon, who is personified as a woman in Revelations 14:8. Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornications. Again we are shown the shocking idea of drinking the wine of her fornications. Surely, this has to be the chalice of the goddess flowing out from her Holy of Holies. This tantric nectar is clearly something very special indeed. Drinking from her cup is being held accountable for her fall. Kissing the shrine of the goddess is obviously a terrible blasphemy to the God of Revelations. We have already heard that he is a jealous God. Apparently yoni worship is not what you should do while you are kneeling before the divine. This is more than a straight sexual taboo. This is a religious and magical taboo. The flowing wines of the goddess have magical virtues, and the most important sacrament of all is the blood-red menstrual flow. Blood is indeed the life. The very idea of ritually consuming the living menstrual blood of the goddess is anathema to Christianity. The communion blood of the Christ is a poor substitute for the blood flowing miraculous from the body of the goddess. If you were wondering where the scarlet appellation came from, look no further. A cold chalice is no replacement for the body of the priestess on the altar possessed by the goddess. This is a resurrection that swings around as dependably as the moon. These are the practices that so horrified the Christian church. One of the angels then takes John to see Babylon, whom he seems pretty smitten with, and I for one don't blame him. Here she is in Revelation 17:4. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was written Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her I wondered with great admiration. There's the clearest description we get, and it's this intoxication that you can feel winging Aleister, Jack, Byron and a whole host of poets into their flights of rapture. John conjures a compelling vision. If you can't fall in love with her after that description, then your heart is made of stone. Go on, read it again, thrill with it. Let's unlock the symbolic code we have been given by the angel. On one level, purple is the royal color of Rome, so Babylon is being identified with the place and ideas of royalty. Wearing purple was a capital offense in ancient Rome. It was the supreme color of kingship. To claim kingship was seen by some as an affront to King Jesus, so the purple also is a heresy. In Kabbalistic terms, red is the color of the 5th Sephirah Gevarah and blue the color of the 4th Sephirah Gesed. The colors mix in the path that joins them, that of lust. Babylon and the beast co-joined. Purple is also importantly the color of the rampant male member. We've covered scarlet already, the hot red male energy, menstrual blood and the petals of the aroused priestess. Gold, precious stones and pearls are not just the trappings of royal splendor, they also represent occult virtues or powers. Gold represents spiritual purity freed from the corruption of its origins. This alchemical process is the result of the 7 heads of the beast rising up to become one with her. The rubies of Gevarah, the emeralds of Netzach, the pearls of Yesod, these are the precious stones. The magical powers have become fixed in these stones as talismans. They are the jewelry that adorns the body of the goddess. Babylon is always described in terms of luxury. An abundance of flesh and wealth is described in all the accounts. Partly this is due to John living as a hermit on a barren island, where temptation from his ascetic path of denial was bound to be clothed in the sumptuous delights of curves and consumables. Partly it is the memory of Babylon with her cedar-columned halls and gilt sphinxes, the splendors of the royal court that overawed the Jews. Symbolically there is great importance in this description of the goddess. She's no waif, she's a hips and tits girl. Admittedly she's slimmed down from the famous Willendorf figure of pudgy spheres, but there's still plenty to hold on to. Babylon is ripe with sexual promise. She's all woman, reveling in her physicality. This is a big change from the amorphous beard job Jehovah. This is a goddess you can actually touch and feel. There's no vague promise of hereafter. Babalon is about direct hands-on experience. To worship this goddess is to make love to her, and to revel in the world of the senses. Rather than denying the world, she asks us to love it. The golden cup is her sex filled with the golden solar light of the beast. It is not just her menstrual blood, it has combined with the blood of the beast, his sperm. They are both drunk with desire, or less judgmentally, in a trance state. The vision of the cup is a repetition of a theme from Proverbs 23:31-33. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his colour to the cup, when it moveth itself aright, at the last it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. There are hints here of a visionary sacrament, perhaps a remnant of an earlier rite where a draught of the sacred wine brought on visions of the goddess and a speaking in tongues. She is mystery in that her secret, that is her sex, is concealed rather than revealed. She is the mother of harlots in that her priestesses are holy whores, trained in sexual magic as the highest religious sacrament. She is also described as the mother of the abominations of the earth. This is a very ancient idea. In Babylonian mythology, Tiamat, the dragon mother of chaos, gives birth to a whole host of seeming monsters. There are a lot of variants on this elder god mythology. These creatures, like the offspring of the Nephilim and the daughters of man, are an abomination, literally bad omens. So the holy whore's union with the beast is responsible for all the half-god half-man magical experiments ranging about in the Middle East. This kind of genetic engineering is right out according to Revelations. The fact that the Virgin Mary got hot and heavy with a dove seems to be conveniently overlooked. So what we have is a taboo against using sex magic to create new beings with godlike potential, not a blanket ban on animal sex. We simply have to follow Jesus and knock any ideas of mystic eugenics on the head. Heaven forbid that we wear animal masks when we make out and are possessed by their atavisms, let alone aim to have children that are more than human. The text goes on to tell us that the 7 heads of the beast are the 7 mountains she sits on, and in Revelation 17:18 the angel explains that the woman is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. For those of you who haven't joined the dots, we're now talking about Rome. This is the bit that gets all the anti-Catholics jumping about and pointing the finger. The classic text on this is Christopher Hislop's 2 Babylons, which has the dubious honor of being name-checked by both fundamentalists and occultists alike. It is possible that Babylon was also seen by John in the figure of Venus, whose temple was the largest in ancient Rome. The temple was split in dedication between Roma and Venus. Roma spelt backwards is of course Amor. In making the love goddess his enemy and casting Nero as Antichrist, John was attacking the very foundations of imperial Rome. Revelations is a whole mess of tenses, past, present and future, so any budding Nostradamus can read any level of meaning into it. When the angel of Revelations reveals that Great Babylon is fallen, and points at Rome, it is echoing the earlier words of Isaiah. This earlier prophet was emphatically looking towards Samaria. Perhaps the most popular reading of the 7 heads of the beast and the cryptic wounding is that this refers to the succession of Caesars. I'd like to propose a more practical physical use for the beast as an energy working, in Eastern terms, a Shiva to Babylon's Shakti. While Revelations can certainly be seen as a prophetic text dealing with Rome, there is a bigger picture. Babylon and the beast can be say nas a sexual formulato di Dios peronti to enlightenment. In my book, fasting and flagellation are no match for fucking, though they can be profitably combined. VTHE Prelude of Victoria and Binding off Satan via the Glory of New Jerusalem. 8. The Conclusion and Epilogue. Anyway, back to Revelations. This new Babylon gets a right royal kicking from Jehovah and his winged muscle until nothing is left. Then the beast and the false prophet get to take a swim in a lake of brimstone. The Lamb lives happily ever after in the New Jerusalem that replaces wicked old Babylon. The end. Only it isn't. This rabid document contains the seed of the goddess, disseminated into every hotel room, thank you Gideons, and read by every rebel angel worth their salt. It's the answer book at the back of every New Testament past all the hokey loaves and fishes malarkey. Christianity's hatred of the great goddess and denial of feminine power has bent round and bit them on the ass. The war has not been won. You are still free to choose your side. All I am doing with this book is expanding your freedom of choice, the god of vengeance and hatred, or the goddess of love and the 7-headed beast. First off, I am going to give my answer to the question, who is she that inspired St. John the Divine? I want to challenge the idea that Babylon simply came to John fully formed out of the ether and show the historical roots that he was trying to rip out of the earth. It also appeals to me to use and be used by this goddess to destroy the last vestiges of sin and guilt. Babylon reclaims the essential primal power of woman and man, giving birth to something entirely new. The entirely new thing is the Antichrist, the crowned and conquering child of Thelema, or for the Night-Skians among you, the Superman. I am not making wild claims. I am a practical magician, not an half-baked historian. What I am interested in is this particular goddess flickering like a flame through the ancient world and then bursting into life here and now. Weeping we remembered Zino, daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed. Happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Psalm 37 8-9. Without an understanding of the theological history of the Old Testament, we cannot begin to fathom where the holy whore has come from. These histories are almost lost to allegory and fable. We can interpret them on a symbolic level, but it is vital that we engage with them, because they are the dreams that have made our modern flesh. Daniel, Kings 2, Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Lamentations are lying unread but still exerting their influence over our culture and ideas. Old wars, eternal battles between good and evil, these self-same characters are recast in Revelations and the tale that becomes Babylon and the dragon. These seeds, these dragon's teeth, are a harvest we still reap. In 598 BCE the unthinkable happened. Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, took the holy city of Jerusalem and carried many of its people into slavery. These ancient events have echoed down to us through history. In many ways Christianity is still dying from this old weeping wound in what was a small war. The prophet Jeremiah had prophesied the fall of Jerusalem. The reason for this was simple for him: the idolatrous worship of other gods by the people. For Jeremiah, life was one long lament, a misery of betrayal. Yahweh had not deserted his people, they had deserted him. Yahweh would punish this loss of purity, using Nebuchadnezzar as the instrument of his vengeance. Jeremiah almost gloats over the foreseen destruction of Jerusalem. He berates Israel as a harlot. For him it is the incense burned on the rooftops, to Baal, and the worship of sweet Asherah in the groves and high places which would bring down Babylon upon them. His ranting was massively unpopular, and Jeremiah, already an outsider, found himself imprisoned as a traitor. When Nebuchadnezzar came and fulfilled the prophecy, Jeremiah was released from his dungeon where he was being slowly suffocated to death with mud. Rather than holding out to see his people put to the sword, Jehoiakim, king of Judah and vassal of the Egyptian pharaoh, wisely surrendered to the Babylonians who surrounded his city. Not surrendering would have meant the vigorous butchery of the population. These were the rules of ancient warfare. In recompense, 10,000 Jews were carried into exile. This was more than a military defeat, this was a religious disaster. As well as the human loss, the Babylonians took heavy tribute from the Temple of Solomon and the royal palace. The Babylonian Marduk, a serpent god, had triumphed over the people of Yahweh. Their tribal god had failed them in what must have been a hammer blow to their national psyche. The prophets cast about for something to blame. It could not be their god that had failed them. The fall of Jerusalem must have been the result of an enemy within. The soul-searching turned into a witch hunt, a search for the canker in the rose of Israel. The Jews that were taken down into Babylon were plunged into a thoroughly alien world. Despite the shared histories and the overlapping mythologies plundered from Sumerian sources, these were very different peoples. Seen through pious eyes, Babylon was a city of sin, a sensory assault of carnality and idolatry. There are 8 gates to the city flung across the cardinal points, each gate a god: Ishtar, Marduk, Ninurta, Enlil, Urash, Shamash, Sin, Adad. The Tower of Babel stood in the city midst, reaching up to heaven. Some cite as the Jews came down the bold Euphrates, borne on tears to Babylon, the greatest city on earth. They will have come through the enamel blue brick Ishtar gate with its golden maenage and copper-covered cedar doors. This is the architecture of awe. Lions and bulls and serush gleam in polychrome glory along the sacred ways. The walls are all gleaming claws and fangs, the city like a devouring vagina dentata with a soft succulent center. Luxury, excess, wealth is everywhere. Here women sell themselves in the temple plaza for a single coin. All of them, high and low-born. The women of Babylon are whores, spreading themselves for strangers and calling it religion. Here they parade a great monitor lizard through the streets and proclaim that it is God. Babylon worships the serpent. The place is thick with magi, eunuchs, courtesans and dancers. The air is spiced, the colors all too immodestly bright. Everything reminds them, we are not in Jerusalem anymore. The prophet Ezekiel is among the Jews taken into Babylon, and he steps up the attack on idolatry. This is taken from chapter 6 for those of you that didn't get past his early description of flying saucer encounters. And they that escape of you shall remember me among the nations whither they shall be carried captives, because I am broken with their whorish heart, which hath departed from me. and with their eyes which go whoring after their idols, and they shall loathe themselves for the evils which they have committed in all their abominations. He continues with a solution and a threat, there is no place for rivals to their God. Then shall ye know that I am the Lord, when their slain men shall be among their idols, round about their altars upon every high hill, in all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savour to all their idols. There is rich evidence in Ezekiel of the plurality of gods and goddesses being worshipped by the people at this time, rather than the monolithic grip of the one true God that most assume. There is also the stark fate of competing religions laid out which has been enacted in a global pogrom from the Middle East to Europe and the Americas in his name. This is obviously a God of love. Despite the indubitable anguish, the captivity was not a state of pitiless slavery. The city of Babylon needed skilled craftsmen and the status of the Jews was respected. The Book of Daniel, though an unreliable pastiche of Aramaic and Hebrew, does contain the seed truth that the Jews were also respected for their skills in magic and dream divination. Nebuchadnezzar even allowed them to worship Yahweh and maintain their cultural identity. This despite the darkly prophetic railing against Babylon that was prevalent among the priests and brought to the ears of Nebuchadnezzar by a network of spies. The most tangible symbol of oppression for the captives was, perhaps inevitably, the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. If there is one thing people still know about Babylon, it's the tower, and God's disapproval of such avant-garde town planning. It apparently broke all the planning regulations and simply had to go. There's a building statute about overlooking deity, and so things went all 9/11 shaped. We have a parable here about a group of magicians deliberately raising themselves to the level of God. Apparently that's a bad thing. All those who agree can quietly close this book and walk away before it's too late. If you would like to open your Bibles to Genesis 11, it tells us that the Elohim were not chuffed and smacked down the contentious edifice, and the men, now speaking different languages, were scattered across the earth. This heroic piece of skyline reclamation is of course shown in tarot card number Suite 16, the Tower. Unfortunately, the Old Testament version of events rather misses the point because it is a cut-and-paste job of mistranslated Sumerian myth. The Elohim who allegedly destroyed the tower are better translated as gods and goddesses than the rather grand and monotheistic God the Most High. In fact, the Great Flood, huge chunks of Genesis and the whole Adam and Eve tale were ripped unceremoniously from Sumer. With all of this bad-mouthing, it would be easy to miss the fact that there was an actual Tower of Babel, a bricks-and-mortar temple that created all this anger. Sure enough, in Babylon we have the sacred stepped pyramid temple that started all this rumpus. The city in Akkadian was called Babili, meaning Gate of God, and the biblical interpretation of Babel was derived from the Hebrew Balol, to confuse. The wordplay can be found in Genesis 11:9. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. This is not only bad etymology, it is a good example of the injustice Hebrew translation did to the complexity of Sumerian thought. The tower itself was called Etemenanki by the Babylonians, which translates as the rather more constructive house of the foundation of heaven and earth. The original temple on the site had been smashed by Sennacherib with his Assyrian army.
The biblically famed tower which dominated
the landscape was rebuilt by Nabopolassar, the father of Nebuchadnezzar, upon the foundations of this structure in the name of Marduk, the dragon god. The king and crown prince removed their royal robes and bore up the first bricks, earth and mortar on their heads in a symbolic act that we see now in the laying of the foundation stone of a new building by a local dignitary or head of state, as well as in Masonic symbolism. This was not simply a temple placed at random, this was the axis mundi, the vertical cosmic axis of the world. The temple and city of Babylon are the central point between the heavens and the underworld. The foundations were the very point where Marduk had been born and humans created from clay. In the temple the mythic and the mundane mixed, as this is where the worlds overlapped. For the Babylonians, with their obsession with the past and the origin of all things, the temple was a functioning time machine. It enabled the king to become Marduk himself in the New Year celebrations, and the priests and priestesses to daily experience the presence of the living gods. The tower itself is a form of the sacred hill or mound, the primeval earth rising out of the waters after the deluge of the flood. This symbolism can be found in Atta 19 of the Tarot, the sun, and in many ancient mythologies. This is the point which can be called in the beginning. Samaria itself can be seen as the sacred hill, raising its fertile mound between the Tigris and Euphrates. For the ritualist, this symbol is still used, it is the magical circle. The Israelites in exile saw the 297-foot-tall tower as a powerful symbol of their oppression. In our rage glutted on skyscrapers and poured concrete, it is hard to imagine the impact that this completed architectural feat had upon the ancient mind. Let's be mischievous for a moment and consult 777, the occult numerological dictionary entry for that number. Lo and behold, we have a swathe of significant words that share the number 297. Thesaurus/Gazophalacium, Greek for dictionary. A secured house, a fortified castle. The throne, a name of Briar. Nuriel, the angel of elemental earth, also spelled Uriel, the neck. All delightfully significant, but only if the ancient Babylonians had decided to use feet and inches as their measures of choice. The correspondences may be intriguing. But let's not make the mistake of the Israelites and balance false assumptions on each other and then wonder why our edifices collapse before we reach the stars. It would be better for us to build like the Babylonians, step by careful step, to the Holy of Holies. The Sumerian temple or ziggurat that crops up in biblical lore was the sacred mountain. It is both the body of the goddess and the phallus of the god. The tower is the tree pillar connecting heaven and earth. The axis mundi. An attempt in glazed brick to nuzzle the G-spot of the heavens into riotous ecstasy. Remember the description of Inanna with her tower headdress? This is the tower. If you want to take this to the nth degree, then all crenulated crowns come from the Babylonian tradition. The temple was comprised of heaven, earth and underworld. We've got a shift here from the earth goddess to a stellar consciousness and magic that looks to the 7 sacred planets. The ziggurat in Babylon was indeed painted in the colors of the 7 planets. At the summit of the tower was a ritual temple/cave/womb/tomb where the god and goddess enacted the sacred marriage and descent into the underworld. This is not idle speculation. We have the account of Herodotus, who visited in 5 BC when the tower was still intact. He accurately describes the step pyramid and the bridal chamber. There was a tower of solid masonry upon which was raised a second tower and on that a third, and so on up to 8. On the topmost tower there is a spacious temple, and inside the temple stands a couch of unusual size, richly adorned, with a golden table by its side. They also declare, but I for my part do not credit it, that the god comes down in person into this chamber, and sleeps upon the couch. Herodotus' skepticism is because of his literal reading of the descent of the god, but make no mistake, this is high magic. Wicca appropriately calls it the Great Rite. The high priest and priestess or king and queen are becoming the god and goddess and enacting the very first creative act that brought the universe into being. If you need another billion examples to saturate your unconscious, then go read J.G. Frazier's The Golden Bough. One living example in your own life would serve you far better. With the Tower of Babel we have cosmic measurements being turned into words and letters, and that gets the Freemasons all excited. This temple can be taken as the ground zero of sacred architecture. There is nothing haphazard going on here. This is the place in history where the repetitive chants of shamanism have become a crafted poem. The Tower of Babel is composed of precisely measured symbolic parts. Magicians are deliberately looking at the heavens and making representations of what they see on the earth. Civilization has been wedded to the high magical arts, and how lovely that is. The actual historical tower fell into ruin when Xerxes of Persia took Babylon. It was a slow decay rather than a dramatic act of divine vengeance. The gods and goddesses who had bred the Nephilim and engineered the rise of man were abandoned. The city and tower overrun. This loss of the link to the sky gods and the multitude of the tongues spoken by the invaders is the reason behind the idea of a lost language. In a sense, the language that John Dee was trying to find is this lost language, the intercourse between gods and goddesses and men and women. This is the secret knowledge that Enoch, who was swept up to heaven, learned. Even the sexual cross-matching between Dee and Kelly and their wives that the angels demanded can be viewed through this prism as a genetic experiment at creating divinity in man. These are exactly the ideas we find in Sumerian creation myth and with the accounts of the Nephilim who lay with mortal women to sire gods. The Sumerian gods did not die here. The pantheon decamped to Israel and the dragon court of Egypt. All part of the grand plan of the Sumerian Anunnaki, literally heaven come to earth. From here you can conjecture about a blood link from the Sumerian gods who lay with mortal children, to the royal house of David and on through an impossible succession of orders to the Templars and beyond. In this reading the tower and the tarot become a repository of forbidden knowledge carrying this secret teaching down the ages in a code that only initiates of the mysteries could read. If there is a lineage of genuinely alien blood, then I can only say that by this century it is no longer a robust burgundy but a rather insipid rosé. Certainly ancient historical events are an important part of unlocking the wisdom of this curious house of cards. Our ignorance about Samaria, the very cradle of civilization, is something that must be fixed if we are ever to understand where we came from and where we are going. Space aliens with eugenics plans fail the test of common sense. We need to look closer at the double helix to understand what kind of dragon is in the blood which drives us towards the stars. So why in the Hermetic tradition does the tower look so sketchy? Phone line psychics are banned from using it. As if taking a card from the pack can remove an idea from existence. It's one of the idiot cards in the tarot that gets turned over to a gasp by the fortune teller. The thing is, it's the wrong kind of gasp. Those who have studied the tarot may allow themselves a knowing smile at this point. The Tower card contains the essential truth of this ancient temple. It's an enormous cock detonating wildly into the night sky with all sorts of apocalyptic lightning. Lightning actually starts at the ground and travels up, going on. Now before you get too cozy with the idea, the orgasm we are talking about here is one where the ego goes bang. The self is annihilated. Utterly. This is the secret of Babylon. This is the path of life, but paradoxically that of death and destruction. In our increasingly turbulent times, this is one paradox you would do well to study. Are you enough of a chameleon to cope? We are all children of Babel in the sense that we are trying to find a language to talk to each other and our gods with. The Great Escape. After 3 years of sworn peace, Jehoiakim leads Jerusalem in rebellion against the conquerors. Babylon descends once more and chastises the city. That's putting it mildly. Jehoiakim dies and his son is taken to Babylon, taking the bad news to his exiled people. Zedekiah appointed as king, rebels in turn. After 18 months of siege and starvation, Jerusalem is burned. The temple and palace are razed to the ground. There is no quarter given this time. Zedekiah's sons are killed in front of him and then his eyes torn out. Even more captives are carried down to Babylon. In the biblical version, Nebuchadnezzar darkens into death, afflicted by demons and shades. Nothing can cure him, neither gods nor men. The Book of Daniel casts their hero as the interpreter of Nebuchadnezzar's portentous dreams, just as Moses was able to play Freud to the Pharaoh. In this version, Nebuchadnezzar ends up bowing to the God of Daniel. This is all rather wistful thinking, as is Daniel's faith making him immune to lions, something the Romans never seemed to tire of disproving in the Colosseum. The apocryphal book Bel and the Dragon adds another dimension to this tale, slotting in just before the adventure in the lion's den. In this account, Daniel rumbles a priestly scam where they are using a secret entrance to enter the temple and are eating the offerings to a statue of Marduk and claiming the statue lives. Nebuchadnezzar has them killed for this. He goes on to rather preposterously let Daniel slay Marduk. It's all rather Japanese monster movie, what with the pyrotechnics and what was no doubt a dressed-up monitor lizard. And in that same place there was a great dragon, which they of Babylon worshipped. And the king said unto Daniel, Wilt thou also say that this is of brass? Lo, I:24 he liveth, he eateth and drinketh. Thou canst not say that he is no living God, therefore worship him. Then said Daniel unto the king, I will worship the Lord my God, for he is the living God. But give me leave, O king, and I shall slay this dragon without sword or staff. The king said, I give thee leave. Then Daniel took pitch, and fat, and hair, and did seethe them together, and made lumps thereof. This he put in the dragon's mouth, and so the dragon burst in sunder. And Daniel said, Lo, these are the gods ye worship. The reason I'm including this dragon story is that it is another clear influence on Revelations. The dragon is emblematic of the old enemy, Babylon. Meanwhile, in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's mind is stricken and the empire also crumbles. The people say that he has been abandoned by Marduk. The Jews sing songs of their deliverance in the ghettos. Nebuchadnezzar prophesies the coming of Persia and the fall of Babylon, and it is not long in coming. Alas, Daniel is an unreliable source. Nebuchadnezzar is succeeded by several short reigning kings, and the madness of Nebuchadnezzar should more properly be attributed to Nabonidus. But let's not get too snarled in dead kings, we can leave that to the historians. I:23. I:25. I:26. I:27. It is not Yahweh who saves the Jews in Babylon. Cyrus the Great rises and descends on the old enemy, an empire weakened by misrule and madness. The Jews are released. In 537 BCE, some 40,000 Jews returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, a fresh infusion of zealous believers forging a national identity around a united stand against all things Babylonian. The very place had become a byword for evil. The damage had been done. Here are the tales to become nightmares, of whores and serpents and towers and strange gods. Here is the enemy, the songs of lamentation ring around her. It would be wrong to lay the blame for the blackening of Babylon at the feet of the Jewish people. Antisemitism is a vile thing. The suppression of the goddess has required the complicity of many small minds, large nations and ugly power plays. It is important to learn where these ideas came from in order to defeat them. We must remember that for them to take hold they must have found fertile soil in other climes where opulence, sexuality and paganism were reviled. Now we must turn to the goddesses of ancient Babylon to get to the core of the tale of the great whore of Revelations. How many miles to Babylon? Who Is she that? Looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners. The Song of Songs. The deserts of Iraq once bloomed with wild roses. Sumerian ideas suffused the ancient world with their heady perfume, from the Hebrews to the Greeks and Romans, as well as spreading east into Hinduism and Buddhism. Shiva Shakti is an echo of that earlier pair of mythical lovers, Inanna and Dumuzi. We have lost the link and imported our knowledge of sacred sex from India as if there was never such an exotic bloom seen here. The richness of Babylonian culture has been rendered down into a mere biblical watchword for sin. The substance of the civilization, the history of that holy city with its exotic gods and goddesses has faded away. The hot erotic heart of Western sex magic was certainly pulsing in Samaria, where now it goes sadly black-clad and veiled. This is a love story where we have forgotten the name, and even the very existence of our beloved Babylon. The angular marks of a stylus on clay and the slag heaps of burned brick do not have the immediate impact of the pyramids of Egypt or the classical temples of Greece. But this is where the goddess that we know as Babylon was born, in Samaria, the cradle of civilization. When the goddess says she is Babylon, it is back to Babylon that we must go. It is time that we conclusively prove that Inanna Ishtar is the goddess whose DNA matches what Revelations has ranted about. This is our original Eden, the ground zero, ring-fenced and razor-wired against our trespass. Well, my bold reader, there is no need to be afraid. Let me lead you back through the lion gates and down the processional ways. Ishtar was the goddess of the city of Babylon, and her cult and that of all the associated love goddesses were horribly immoral for the displaced Israelites. What makes things even worse is that Inanna in her guise as Astarte was the goddess of choice in Israel. She was both an alien and a familiar rival to the hegemony of Yahweh. If you believe the conspiracy theory of Jeremiah, then Inanna Astarte was responsible for the fall of the first Jerusalem. What better way for John to bolster the idea of a new Jerusalem than by killing off the perennial threat of this gorgeous goddess? What more dangerous enemy is there to your purported message that God is love than a tradition based on explicit, erotic union with the divine? As we have already seen, the captivity of the Jews in Babylon massively impacted their national and religious identity. Their tribal god had a very simple approach. All other religions, their gods and goddesses, were false. This dualistic, good versus evil view persists through to Revelations, where it reaches its zenith. In an atmosphere of outright religious persecution, who can blame him? John chooses Babylon, the old enemy, to personify evil and stand in opposition to the new improved washed whiter than white heavenly Jerusalem. There was no goddess called Babylon, but it is clear who he means, the love goddess Inanna Ishtar. John would have fervently read the Old Testament, with its accounts of Astarte and Ishtar, and added that to his contemporary experience of the cults of Aphrodite and Isis. The love goddesses and the unbroken power of the priestess and Heta were the ultimate enemy, as they represented the triumph of the flesh. They were recognition of the ultimate reality of God as a hermaphroditic fusion of the male and female, with sex as the highest sacrament. The cults of the love goddesses promised transcendent experience that did not require a priest to unroll a Jesus sheath as a barrier between the worshipper and gnosis. This does not mean that pagan Rome was a paradise of goddess-loving strumpets flouncing about in sandals and slips. In criticizing Christianity, I do not mean to place the imperial world on a pedestal. What is intriguing for us is how much of Inanna there is to be found in the goddess Babylon, despite the yawning chasm of time between the first fall of Jerusalem and the revelation of John. Repetition of the name of the old enemy is only part of the answer, and historical sources were scant at the time. There does not seem to be a rational account for the level of matching detail. The magical explanation is that gods and goddesses are independent entities which we can directly connect with. John was dabbling his fingers in the fresh red wound of a very ancient and yet very living goddess, Inanna Ishtar. First we need to clear up the confusion of names. The Sumerian Inanna predates the Babylonian Ishtar. Inanna was worshipped in southern Samaria, and Ishtar was worshipped in the north. These goddesses speak with one voice. They describe the same archetype. They are the same goddess. The Babylonian Ishtar inherited Inanna's rituals and symbols as her contemporary and successor. Inanna became Ishtar. Both names look the same, impressed into wet clay with a stylus. It is only the pronunciation that is different. What we get here is a glimpse of the way that the goddess has come down to us. Amalgamated by war and trade, recognized and integrated into the pantheons of their neighbors. In the heady days before the tyranny of monotheism, the various cults had a holistic appreciation of the forces they worshipped. Brand loyalty was not a big issue. I will be switching between these two goddesses and their myths as they are so overlapped. If students of ancient history can just bear with me and focus on the magical fact that Inanna and Ishtar are one. The later Babylonians cast back to Sumer for the mud bricks that built the foundations of their culture. We have a clear description of Babylon from Revelations, so it is only right that we should compare that with the images we have of Inanna Ishtar. Inanna is depicted wearing a horned crown that encloses the sacred tiered mountain, cone, pyramid or tower. The headdress is a shorthand method for describing the powers and nature of the goddess, something we see taken to its logical conclusion in Egyptian iconography. The horns represent the moon, and sure enough she is described in the texts as the daughter of the moon. Her father, the moon god, is ironically called Sin. The Kabbalists among you will see that in this aspect Inanna instantly maps onto Malkuth, the 10th Sephirah and daughter of the lunar Yesod. This fits with the fleshy nature of Babylon. Her kingdom is the world rather than some cotton wool cloud hereafter. This horned moon cradles a tower, in the same way that Yesod, the moon, is beneath the tower on the tree of life. If you aren't a Kabbalist, then just let that all wash over you. The tower is both a clearly phallic symbol and a representation of the sacred architecture of the Tower of Babylon. In one sense she is a goddess of this early civic pride, much as Athena is a protector of Athens. In another she represents the highest form of magic, sexual union. The tower and moon are the genitals locked in love, an X-rated version of the Chinese Tai Chi. Moving down over her beautiful face, she wears lapis jewels and a rainbow necklace. Her girdle is the zodiac. In later carved images she is circled by the stars of the zodiac. The zodiac is even referred to as Ishtar's girdle. From this we can deduce that she is a rather more important goddess than just being a planetary deity. In love goddess terms, we can think of her as Miss Universe rather than a provincial beauty queen. The lapis jewels are the indigo blue of the night sky. The rainbow necklace is a more complex image. The rainbow is created by the splitting of the divine white light, giving 7 visible colors, and these are the 7 sacred planets we know as the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Rainbows are formed by droplets of water illuminated by the fire of the sun. So the rainbow is a splendid vision of the harmony of water and fire that are needed for creation and for the crops to grow. This is a fertile vision. One more aside for the Kabbalists, this symbol is encoded on the tree of life by the 3 lowest paths, Kof, Shin and Tau, which spell Kshith, a rainbow in Hebrew. This mystery is further explained by Atta 14 in the Tarot. The best representation is art in Aleister Crowley's Book of Thoth. The first woman in Revelations is described in similar starry terms. Clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Though not an exact match, it does show that the description John uses has a far more ancient legacy than plain Mary. It is the description of a goddess. In Revelations John compares the 7 stars of Babylon unfavorably with the 12 of the New Jerusalem. He is stripping the pagan statues to clothe the Virgin Mother of his cult. To confuse the celestial symbolism further, Inanna is referred to as both Venus and Sirius. This is not a contradiction, these are just different methods of describing her loveliness. There is logic to this, it is not just a variant on the same chat-up line. The 8 pointed stars that are found in her portrait symbolize Venus. So why 8 rays rather than the 7 of our ceremonial magic tradition? This comes down to the astrological methods of the Babylonians, who spent an inordinate amount of time gazing at the starry heavens. 8 is the number of years in one sacred year, which is the time it takes for the full moon to coincide with the longest and shortest day, thus reconciling the lunar and solar year. So Inanna is the reconciler, the bridge between the solar and lunar. The reason that she can take this exalted role is down to sex. We all know how good it is to coincide. Venus has 2 aspects. As the morning star she is ever virgin, as the evening star the divine harlot. Inanna embodies both qualities, she is the whore and the holy one. There is speculation that Venus is the star of Bethlehem and that she and her son/lover Dionysus are the original Jesus and Mary. I dare you to find a more ironic piece of history. Whether this is a fact, it is more than likely that the Jews took their model for a new religion out of their captivity in Babylon. In the same way that they took their conception of the one true God from the ill-fated cult of the Aten in Egypt. There are clear parallels which threaten the idea that the God of the Jews was the one true God with a unique and universal claim. When she is described as Sirius, then Inanna is the goddess of destruction. In Samaria, Sirius rises in July heralding the dog days of death, bringing heat. The scorpion is sacred to Inanna in this role as destroyer. This is the same scorpion you will find tucked away in medieval portraits of death. It's also code for the female orgasm, which the French still call la petite mort. Sex is about both creation and destruction, life and death. Both sides are part of her. There is a temptation to view love goddesses in a benign soft focus, the kind of Vaseline-smeared lens effect of 70s porno pics. Nothing could be further from the truth. Love is an emotion with destroying power, careless of human happiness, social constraints and rational analysis. Without this bittersweet sting, the image of the goddess would lose all power. Goddesses are as fully rounded and complex as humans, if not more so. They are not the simple bundles of force that characterize elementals and the other fauna lower down the celestial ladder, but are large enough to contain contradictions. Moving down over the body of Inanna, perhaps your eyes would like to linger a moment on her naked breasts. In our jaded age it may be hard to remember that the images and statues of the goddess were designed to create an erotic charge. We have had a glut of mother goddesses with the new age. This is a more pornographic proposition. It is an image engineered to arouse. Breasts are not only suckled by infants. The image of a love goddess was designed to stir the loins and tease sexual energy into a waking state of worship. The images were often used to temporarily house the goddess, in the same way that batteries hold electricity but are not electricity themselves. Attacking this as idol worship is lazy thinking. A facile understanding of a magical technology. Attacking this as idol worship is lazy thinking. A facile understanding of a magical technology that is now exploited by the advertising industry and the Catholic Church far more than by neo-pagans and witches. The goddess accessorizes her décolletage with a staff of serpents held in a hand that ends in almond-eyed nails. If you have struggled through your anthropology, you'll recognize that the serpent-holding goddess is the great goddess of prehistory. And it is her symbols that have been seethed in the whole Mediterranean basin. Her association with the serpent will create quite different connections for Christians with their Adam and Eve myth, where the serpent has been cast in a rather dubious supporting role. The serpent is an ancient symbol of wisdom, rebirth, healing, destruction, and knowledge. The phallic connection is pretty damn obvious. This goddess is a snake charmer, with everything which that implies. The caduceus is not the only serpent connection. One of the titles of Inanna is Loud Thundering Storm, something she shares with the Gnostic Sophia when she is hymned by the world-shattering beauty of Thunder Perfect Mind. When she appears in this aspect, she rides the storm dragon, and her voice is the voice of thunder rolling over the Akkadian plains. In Babylon she was also associated with Marduk, the dragon god we have already encountered in Daniel. Without doubt, we have found the woman seated on the great red dragon of Revelations. Moving into the Bronze Age, her delicate sandaled feet rest on the back of a great golden lion. This is the second beast of Revelations, and there's a clear symbolic message here. She is riding the beast, sometimes she is pictured standing upon it, in others controlling it with her thighs. The wild force is directed to destroying her enemies. It is not castrated or tamed but used to the full extent of its power with her skillful manipulation. The beast and beauty are in perfect balance, the two of you have become one. The goddess taking on the face of war has been seen by historians as a degradation, but is it? If you are keen to package and sell a friendly goddess-based religion as an antidote to that nasty patriarchy, war is not counted as a virtue. If you're living in a city-state surrounded by enemies, a goddess riding bareback on a lion is no bad thing. I prefer a feisty tooled-up goddess with blood under her nails to a simpering stay-at-home. Let us put aside our unhelpful political correctness and accept that this raw atavistic energy is the wellspring of magical power. Sex and violence cannot be severed. The dragon and lion have persisted as images of royalty from these ancient days. It would however be a romantic mistake to confuse the persistence of the archetype with an unbroken lineage of blood from the courts of Egypt and Babylon. This is an occult dream, loved by conspiracy theorists and aristocratic cranks. It also misses a more subtle transmission of knowledge that has transfused the revival of the Babylonian tradition. If there is some grand secret, then it is that the promising wine has turned to vinegar in the flask. None of the great teachers of the last 1,000 years have come from one maternal or paternal line. What is important is that you fix her image in your mind's eye before we go any further. All of the symbols around her tell a telesmatic story that should drench your cortex like attar of reddest roses. Her other titles are scattered over her like the confetti of petals that lay in her temples: Queen of Heaven, Daughter of the Gods, Slave Girl, Dancer of the Gods, Hierodule of Heaven, the Holy Whore. Maybe that's enough. All you need to do is invoke that image and repeat those titles, and you can experience the splendor that is Babylon. But, as the well-worn martial arts maxim goes, to feel is to know. Very clearly we can see a love and war whore goddess. She is associated with the lion and the dragon, both the beasts of Revelation which Babylon is seen seated upon. She is intimately linked to the city which gave the goddess her name. Her values are the antithesis of Leviticus. In Inanna Ishtar we have found the source of revelations, but we should not rest here. There is more to learn in the ruins of this civilization. Holy, holy, holy is the whore. Both Inanna and Ishtar were whore goddesses. This is a big cultural stumbling block for most of us. If it wasn't, this book wouldn't be screaming, panting and dragging its nails down my back demanding to be written. Like the tantric rite of copulating on a corpse, the idea of venerating a whore seems perverse. To the Christian it's a deliberate act of black magic, opposing the cult of Mary the Immaculate Virgin Mother of God with the cult of the dirty great slut. This rather misses the fact that the holy whores predate sterile Mary by a rather sizable chunk of time. The opposite mistake is to take devotion to the whore as an excuse for indiscriminate sexual consumption. Devotion to the whore requires that you are crowned with love for all, not fucking with an empty heart. This would be a good time to ask, have you ever been in love? What was your answer? The first answer that came to you. Hesitation count as a no. There is no space for thought in the answer. If it is a yes, it must come out of you like a lion rampant. Can you even say it? Unless you can fall in love, all your works are as nothing. This prayer starts on the lips. Set up an image of the goddess and tell her you love her. Bend your thoughts towards her until you are annihilated in love for her. Your mind must be consumed with passion for her, your body resonating to her pulse. If your devotion is pure, the holy whore will receive you in the body of her priestess. If you have never been in love, then stop reading now. There is no point in reading a book on the goddess of love when you have not experienced it. Put your time to better use. Get out and get laid. If you have never been in love, then stop reading now. There is no point in reading a book on the goddess of love when you have not experienced it. Put your time to better use. Get out and get laid and fall in love. Spirit without flesh is an utter waste. The two are intimately intertwined. There was nothing negative about the whore in the ancient world. Her title Hierodule of Heaven means sacred work or servant of the holy in Greek. The word prostitute means to stand on behalf of the goddess. In Hebrew the word zona is used for both prophetess and priestess. Even that wonderful word harlot, rhymes with scarlet, means priestess of Hathor. It is essential that the goddess-hating negativity of Christianity is washed away from these words. Even the term virgin means ever creative receptive potential. It is definitely not a physical state. In many cultures virgin simply meant unmarried, and children born out of wedlock were called virgin-born. That puts rather a different slant on the story of Joseph and Mary. More often than not, virgin was used to contrast with married, and the holy whore is very much her own woman. In the same way that D.H. Lawrence strived to reclaim cunt and cock as beautiful and powerful in his works, the service of Babalon requires that her title of holy whore is proudly held. There is nothing more holy than making love. In the ancient world it was understood that to attain the transcendent moment of union it was best to have a professional priestess skilled in the arts of love. Shrines to Ishtar were set up in the houses of Babalon with an image of her nude and gazing out of a window. In this aspect she was called Galili Mushritu, literally Galili who leans out of a window. This was the typical image of the prostitute and remains the same today, from Amsterdam to Webcam. As we have already seen, this is the image of Jezebel in the Old Testament which led to her death. The temples of the love goddesses were often brothels. The priestess of Inanna would engage in the sacred marriage as an offering to her creative power at the cusp of the new year. The new year was of course Easter, a corruption of her name, Ishtar. Climbing to the summit of the sacred tower she would take her son lover and bring him to goddess. Some of her sacred hymns remain, and they allow us to see through the eyes of Inanna as she begins her seduction. Inanna says, "Bridegroom, dear to my heart, goodly as your beauty, honey sweet, lion, dear to my heart, goodly as your beauty honey sweet. You have captivated me, let me stand trembling before you, bridegroom, I would be taken by you to the bedchamber. You have captivated me, let me stand trembling before you, lion. I would be taken by you to the bedchamber. Bridegroom, let me caress you. My precious caress is more savory than honey, in the bedchamber honey filled. Let us enjoy your goodly beauty. Lion, let me caress you. My precious caress is more savory than honey." When Inanna speaks you want to listen to what she has to say, especially when she's nibbling on your earlobe and saying things like that. As well as the big New Year ritual, the daughters of Babalon would sacrifice their virginity at the temple to a man who would have sex with her as a goddess. The virgins would sit outside the temple and wait for a stranger to come and throw a coin into their lap. Herodotus describes the scene with a less than sympathetic eye. The Babylonians have one most shameful custom. Every woman born in the country must once in her life go and sit down in the precinct of Venus, and there consort with a stranger. Many of the wealthier sort, who are too proud to mix with the others, drive in covered carriages to the precinct, followed by a goodly train of attendants, and there take their station. But the large number seat themselves within the holy enclosure with wreaths of string about their heads, and here there is always a great crowd, some coming and others going. Lines of cord mark out paths in all directions. The women and the strangers pass along them to make their choice. A woman who has once taken her seat is not allowed to return home till one of the strangers throws a silver coin into her lap, and takes her with him beyond the holy ground. When he throws the coin he says these words, The goddess Mylitta prosper you. Venus is called Mylitta by the Assyrians. The silver coin may be of any size. It cannot be refused, for that is forbidden by the law, since once thrown it is sacred. The woman goes with the first man who throws her money, and rejects no one. When she has gone with him, and so satisfied the goddess, she returns home, and from that time forth no gift however great will prevail with her. Such of the women as are tall and beautiful are soon released, but others who are ugly have to stay a long time before they can fulfill the law. Some have waited 3 or 4 years in the precinct. A custom very much like this is found also in certain parts of the island of Cyprus. The sexuality was not theirs, it was from the goddess, and the goddess receives everyone. This acceptance is what it means to be a holy whore. Consider the Lilith. Inanna is also entwined with the Lilith myths. In some tales Inanna is even depicted as Lilith's aunt. Lilith can be found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, making her home in a willow tree whose bark is used to make aspirin and cure headaches, putting pay to that old excuse. When she appears in her aspect as the owl goddess she is called Gilili or Ninana in Akkadian. Lilith is also known as Lily, Lilin, Liljake, Lilutu, and Lilette. All of the names related to Lilith have a trilling fluttering sound like the call of an owl. This is the sound of the bird-like calls of the women you can still hear in lonely Moroccan villages. The easiest way to get in touch with this goddess is by using her name as a mantra and let it echo out across the landscape. Lili. It is about creating a good if somewhat eerie vibration and it brings her into our sphere. It is out here that Lilith has her dominion. She is not a goddess of the city or civilization. Intriguingly, Lilith with her Night Queen malevolence has been championed by witchcraft. In a way that Inanna has not. This tells us more about women's need to regain power and their anger at men than about the relative merits of these two rather different ladies. In Sumerian Lil means dust storm. What we would know as dust devils, the wild ghosts of the barren wilderness. If you have ever come across these you'll know that they seem to be living intelligences rather than mere meteorological freaks. Similar spirits can be encountered on high mountain peaks skittering across the slopes. They are not the friendliest of elementals. These are not the familiar attributes of Babalon who is associated with luxury and splendor. What they do share is sexual allure. To the Babylonians Lilith was known as the hand of Inanna. This has a variety of possible meanings. Firstly, that the priestesses of Inanna can be loosely called Liliths as they serve Inanna. Secondly, the hand of the goddess is a description of one skilled in the art of love. The hand of Inanna is a title conferred on those with perfect control over their sexual organs. These Eastern sexual secrets can still be seen in rocks shaki, or belly dancing, and it is likely that the rites of Inanna, like those of Isis, included ritual dance as well as ritual love-making. Liliths had to be experts at both. The rules then were the same as the rules now: if you can't dance you are going to be terrible in bed. Thirdly, the hand of the goddess is a procurer and harlot, going out and literally bringing men to the goddess. This is a damn sight more appealing than having the Jehovah's Witnesses turning up on your doorstep. Some nerd with a briefcase could be replaced by gorgeous girls in diaphanous shifts. Hello, I'm from Goddess. Have you accepted sexual ecstasy as your one true savior? Now, Lilith does not stay put. She's not that kind of girl. Put wings on a goddess and she's liable to go flitting about, and so Lilith heads out of Samaria and into Hebrew myth. It's pretty clear to see through the chinks in the Bible that other gods and goddesses were worshipped in defiance of Jehovah, especially by women. All the feisty girls in the Bible used their sexuality to get what they wanted. It's more than likely that they were worshippers of Astarte, who is of course Ishtar/Inanna. Lilith again has a supporting folkloric role. The seductive power of Lilith is used in the Bible by Rachel, Tamar, Delilah, Judith, Esther, Ruth, Bathsheba, Lot's daughters, the Queen of Sheba, Yael, and Deborah. Recovering Christians and cunning women would do well to study these examples. In Hebrew Lilith meant handmaiden of a ghost, and this was swirled together with Lael or Layla, the Hebrew and Arabic words for night, as well as the Akkadian Lilutu, wind spirit. This becomes Lilith, the night demon moving without rest in the blasted landscape. It's a powerful image and one shared by the much later Western ideal of the witch. There is an emphasis here on Malefica which has been downplayed in the witchcraft revival, with the rather spurious threefold law as a safeguard against the less socially acceptable aspects of witchery that might threaten tax-exempt status for the fledgling New Age religions. Lilith is still left out in the wild, a goddess gone feral. In Hebrew myth we are confronted by Lilith as a sperm-sucking demon queen, the screech owl. This demoness of wet dreams, this negative Eve, shows the terror of the unconscious realms and the hungry spirits that roam them. Lilith was the first wife of Adam, so the Jewish story goes. Yahweh made her out of filthy and impure earth, and surprise, surprise, she came out bad. Lilith is not a spare rib, She's an independent equal of Adam. When they decide to make love, because no one can resist a bad girl, Lilith wants to be on top. Adam can't get his head around this, and so Lilith unfolds her wings and absconds from the garden to the Red Sea. Yahweh, true to form, sends the winged morality police to get her back, but she won't play their game. She stays put, giving birth to a brood of demons and flitting out to kill children with her smile and suck off sleeping celibates. The shadow of Lilith hung over Adam's next marriage, and Eve got pretty much tarred with the same brush. It is interesting that the woman in Revelations is also described as winged, and perhaps this is another echo of the Lilith myth. The Hebrew Lilith was married to Samael, the devil. They are joined by the blind dragon, not a very difficult symbol to interpret. The blind dragon is described as castrated, which may explain why Lilith is what the porn industry would call a cum-drinking slut. She is renowned as a child killer, and the only children she spawns are astral monsters, a mixture of human sperm and her subtle DNA. This echoes the Nephilim who lay with the daughters of men. In all the ancient myths, the gods are trying to have sex with us to evolve the race. Sex is being used as a magical method of evolution. This strand of thought has re-emerged with alien abduction tales in the late 20th century, whilst the concept of genetic progression or eugenics remains taboo. Our civilization prefers to level down. Our Liliths receive short shrift. In the Zohar, the 13th century Kabbalistic text that claims it was written in the 1st century, the feminine is cut in two. The Shekinah, who is one half, is the consort of God. The second half, Lilith, is the seductive witch. Both of these ladies abide in Malkuth, the 10th and lowest Sephirah. It is fascinating to see how this cultural legacy from the worship of Astarte, Ishtar and Lilith on the high places and holy mountains is made responsible for all that befell the people of Israel. Not only that, but by the time the Zohar is being penned, women and the worship of goddesses have become an excuse and metaphor for the larger spiritual weakness of man. This slur has been made to stick. The prevalence of the title Lilith has led me to consider the witch women of these lush deltas and barren deserts. Perhaps this is a fragment of an even elder witch cult that later got assimilated into the cult of Inanna. Perhaps Babylon first sprang from this nest of demon-worshipping wild women and their attendant lascivious spirits. In some senses Lilith is a toxic version of Babylon, a raw wilderness form. I would caution confusing the two. They are working towards different ends. This kind of female demon turns up as the succubus in medieval times, to the terror and nocturnal relief of chaste monks, priests and nuns. The important point to note here is the way that this force is transmitted. Lilith is able to go from wind spirit to priestess to demoness, traveling across centuries and cultures with her distinguishing characteristics intact. The same is true of Babylon. There is a potent female supremely sexual force rising out of Samaria and through the gaps in Christianity. Sacred sexuality has oozed its way into the Bible and risen to a ferocious flame by the time it gets to Revelations. Lilith has her place, but it is Inanna Ishtar who becomes Babylon, a goddess of love, not a djinn howling wild on the wind. The dove and the serpent. We should also ask, could Babylon be the memory of an actual flesh and blood woman? Many men and women of renown have risen to divine status in much the same way that Catholicism raises saints. Semiramis, with her winning combination of marital and martial prowess, has gouged herself a place in this history, the warrior queen who built Babylon on a whore's history and her own mesmeric beauty. Semiramis is still a title given to strong women leaders, even in our times, with not the death, but rather the neglect of history. Could she be the face that came back to John on Patmos? Let's examine the tale of this troublesome queen. Semiramis means in Syrian the one who comes from the doves. It was told that Semiramis was the daughter of a mermaid demi-goddess. She was raised by doves in the desert on stolen milk, a pretty myth. The dove of course is sacred to Inanna and all love goddesses. She captivated Uns, the ruler of Nineveh. Love at first sight is often aided by this kind of spectacular beauty. Uns quickly made her his queen, entranced by her bedchamber eyes. When Uns joined King Ninus of Assyria in battle against rebellious Bactria, he became equally smitten. It was reputedly Semiramis' tactical help which won the day. Beauty and brains have always been the hallmarks of a real queen, and it's a killer combination. Uns had forgotten the age-old wisdom that when you're in love with a beautiful woman, you gotta watch your friends. Ninus promptly threatened to gouge out the eyes of Uns if he did not hand over Semiramis. The threat was enough, and shamed, Uns hung himself. Ninus married Semiramis and, being no fool, jealously guarded her from other men. She was kept closely protected by his eunuchs. So already we have our feisty warring woman, a true sister of Ishtar. When Ninus died, she reigned in his stead and reputedly built Babylon. The Hanging Gardens are also attributed to her, but they were certainly the later work of Nebuchadnezzar for his pining Persian queen. Semiramis did not rest with the death of her king but waged war in Egypt, Asia, Ethiopia and even India, where she almost died in battle. Her legend spread on spear tips across the east. Naturally, the distinctions between Astarte, Astoreth, Ishtar and Semiramis blurred, just as the black coal lines of Sumerian Inanna had been smudged into Ishtar. This seemed to be an avatar of the goddess living among the people. Semiramis abdicated before her brat son killed her. She vanished, leaving the country folk the sweet notion that she had ascended to heaven in the form of a white dove. The other version of this tale is less winsome. In this telling, Nimrod, rather than Ninus, hooks up with Semiramis in a brothel. She has him torn apart like a sacrificial ram after tricking him into making her king for a day. She fucks her way through the attractive members of her army and then has them murdered to pay for their singular night of passion. She sets herself up as a false god and makes her perversions and wild drug rituals into a sham religion. Hell, it makes a great racy tale for those long nights guarding your flocks. Especially if you think all women are cock-famished manipulative demon bitches. This second version wants Ninus to be identical with the biblical Nimrod, which would neatly sew up the two Babylons' hypothesis that Nimrod and Semiramis are the pagan prototype for papal Rome. It seeks to lay the blame for all ills at the gates of Babylon and a very real woman. But the dates simply don't add up. Semiramis does not appear anywhere in the Bible and the historical accounts are flawed at best. It is tempting to find an ancient beauty who can be blamed for Babylon, a false goddess of corruptible flesh and blood enshrining her personal predilections. But it is more truthful to acknowledge that Semiramis is a mask that the goddess once wore then laid aside. Aspects of Semiramis fused and illuminated the cult of Ishtar. That does not diminish she the fair lady. It does give some idea of the bile that rises at the thought of a goddess of love and how quickly tangled the tales can become. Time, gentlemen, please. It is time to get drunk. If you are not to be the martyred slaves to time, be perpetually drunk. With wine, with poetry, or with virtue as you please. Baudelaire. If you are looking for an avatar of the holy whore, you could do worse than asking a barmaid. It is no mistake that the almond-eyed houris of Muslim paradise serve the drinks. It is the same exchange you can see in hostess bars and lap dancing clubs where the customers project their fantasies on the pliant flesh. In those empty black eyes they are still looking for the whore goddess, to lose themselves in a glimmer of orgasm. So let us get down to business and raise a glass to Sister Sibori. In this chapter you will learn how to get intoxicated with the goddess. The Sibori appear in Sumer as the earthly priestesses of holy tavern harlotry. Sibori is the guardian of the law, in Sumerian me. Creating a priestess of alcohol and sex seemed like an eminently sensible mix, and it still does. You can drink to remember, you can drink to forget, and if you are drunk enough, everything is goddess. In the mad hunt for an aphrodisiac the subtle use of alcohol gets downplayed, but it is a perfect number with it is mimicry of sexual arousal. The flushed cheeks and slight disorientation relax the body into louche abandon. I can see Sibori with her silver cocktail shaker knocking out some wonderful velvet concoctions to loosen up her clients. If you have ever spent a night drinking with witches you will know that this is a skill that has been handed down through the tradition. But more than booze was on tap in the holy tavern. As the gorgeously titled divine barmaid, Sibori controlled the descent to the underworld. In other words, these priestesses knew the pharmaceutical secrets of the poppy, mushroom and hashish. You can add as many more drugs as you like to the bottom of the prescription, but these three are definites in the Soma stakes. The first written mention of the opium poppy in human history comes from Samaria. If you want to look for a more radical psychedelic agent you can look for the moonflower blooms of Tutorial, a flying ointment checklist of thorn apple, aconite and belladonna. You can even conjecture about blue lotus or other drugs, but opium, mushrooms and hashish have the effects and the geographical distribution that match. Magicians have a knack of procuring exotic pharmaceutical tools, and take them with them on their travels. Customs were not so strict back then. Sibori may well have dished out other drugs, but opium, mushrooms and hashish are givens. Probably in combination. Now let us get some perspective here before we lose it in a helter-skelter drug world. We are talking about measured doses for a specific reason, not undisciplined use. Crowley tried this in his Abbey of Thelema where the drugs simply lay in bowls to take or pass over. This path requires a strong mind, and the path of the adept is littered with spent hypodermics and broken brothers. When we talk about the descent to the underworld we are in shamanic territory. This is not some relaxed trip that Sibori presides over as a safety. This is not a recreational wind down and switch off after a hard day at the office pressing the cuneiform. The drugs that Sibori dealt out were to do with the mysteries of sex and death. Let us start with death, it is always popular. The set and setting are concerned with ripping away your body and ego. A metaphysical dismemberment. Opium is one way to get you down there. Go ask Coleridge. The classic tale is of when Inanna descends to hell to rescue Daimuzi. She is challenged in turn by demons at 7 gates. Asterisk at the first gate she gave up her sandals, this is the will. Asterisk at the second gate she gave up her ankle bells, this is the ego. Asterisk at the third gate she gave up her robe, this is the mind. Asterisk at the fourth gate she gave up her breast cups, this is the sex role. Asterisk at the fifth gate she gave up her necklace. This is the rapture of illumination. Asterisk at the sixth gate she gave up her earrings, this is magic. Asterisk at the seventh gate she gave up her crown, this is her godhood. Inanna entered hell naked, as a woman. This is a female lunar and planetary mystery that was played out in Babalon and is still used by some working groups as a powerful method of initiation for their priestesses. This descent can be facilitated by the careful application of drugs. This approach is not always suitable but has the benefit of being unequivocal. The 7 gates correspond to the 7 Sephirah below the supernal triad. This is a female version of working with the 7 heads of the beast. As I am not a woman and have not gone through this experience, I am going to break with occult tradition and shut the fuck up. If I have not personally done it, I will not talk about it as if I have. The other pharmaceutical Sabori dispensers are of course the more subtle drugs of sexual juices. This tradition can also be found with the Suvasini or sweet-smelling ladies of Tantra. These medicines are the jewels of Sabori. Mine's a large one. If you want to be modern, we are talking about a drug-pushing madam fueled up on booze. Does that stretch your vision of holy? Have another drink, you will get there in the end. Sabori is your best friend, and she is going to help you learn about the goddess more quickly than you can say Robert Graves. Open a bottle. She has got something to tell you, but you have got to get ready to hear it. We will break for a paragraph while you nip out and get something to drink. Don't ask what, you already know. We have heard enough about the corrupting influence of books. This one is telling you to go and get yourself a drink. First we will start with a toast to her. It is traditional. I have gone with some elderberry port. It seems sweet enough and the blood red is always good. As she said, you can have what you like. It is always what she likes. So, to Babylon.